Hey, everybody, welcome back. Today, we are going to be talking about real world Salesforce requests in the user setup and security areas. So, again, we are going through actual emails that I've received as a Salesforce consultant over the past 10 years. We're going through real world requests that I've gotten here in the last couple of months to talk through some things that you're actually going to see when you start your job, or you actually want to be aware of when you're in interviews. And these can really help bridge the gap between what you're learning on Trailhead and what's going to happen in the real world. And what you'll notice is in the real world, no one's telling you where to click. No one's telling you where to look. No one's linking you to knowledge articles to help you solve these problems. This is totally on you to understand how to hear the requests from real people and how to think through how to take the next steps and solve these problems. So what I would like for you to do, please don't keep this series to yourself. Please share this with as many people as possible. This is so valuable to so many people out there who don't have Salesforce real world experience, and they're trying to expose themselves and get a better understanding of what Salesforce is all about. And the worst thing we can do is take content like this and hide it. So let's share it with as many people as possible to make sure that they have the leverage they need to feel more confident as entry-level Salesforce professionals coming into the Salesforce ecosystem. That's how we bridge the gap, and that's how we change lives, by helping people close those gaps that they have in their experience and be able to talk about this in interviews, be able to talk about it in the real world, and really make a difference in their ability to land Salesforce jobs. All right, so click subscribe down below so that you don't miss a single video. Check the video description. If you haven't already, check out the 5-day challenge. It is not just, a little clickbait funnel. It is actually an extremely valuable 5 days of exercises for you to go through in the Salesforce space in order to become a Salesforce professional as quickly as possible. So be sure to check that out and share that as well. Again, extremely valuable content that everyone should have access to. All right, so let's dive in. So today we're going to be talking about Salesforce real world request around user setup and security. And so I'm going to go through actual emails that I've received over the last 2 or 3 months in these topic areas. And I'm going to do my best to talk you through how this works, what to think about, and how to solve these problems. So if you look at it the first time and you go, man, that was a little over my head, or I didn't quite understand. Number one, leave a comment down below and say, hey, Brad, I didn't quite understand what you were saying there. Can you tell me, sort of what we're looking at here? Or if you have ideas for how to solve these problems, or you guys want to go into deep dive discussion, comment down below and let's talk about these things. I will respond to everyone. So make sure you drop a comment. All right. So diving in here, Salesforce real world request, user setup, and security. So one tip I'm going to give you before we start is don't trust the user. And I don't mean this in a negative way. What I mean is sometimes users don't fully understand what they're asking, and they might say one thing, but it's not quite true. Like, my password isn't working. That's usually not true. You forgot your password. Or my password isn't working. Well, you might be accidentally not going to the right URL to log into our Salesforce instance. You might be using a username that's not quite right. Maybe you used your email address, but our username convention is not your email address. So there's a lot of things that go into this. Those are just a couple of examples, but don't always trust the user, because what you can do is end up going down a rabbit hole for hours trying to make them be right and solve a problem, when it turns out that wasn't the problem at all, and you should have been looking somewhere totally different. So don't trust the user, trust yourself, and you'll get to know your users better. And some of them, you're like, they know what they're talking about. And then other users, you're like, I don't know them that well. Maybe I need to dig into this and not worry about what they asked for and think more about what the problem is and how I can try to solve it. All right, so let's look at new user setups to get us started. And I'm going to pull this up so you guys can see it. And so this is some of the typical stuff you're going to see with new user setups. It doesn't necessarily tell you everything you need to know, but what we have is, this is a simple email, and they say, hey, we have a new hire starting. This is their name. This is their company email address. This is their position title, their personal email, and maybe their phone extension. So this is really nice. Like, this is structured well. They've given us all the information we need to know, except we don't know their role, we don't know their profile, we don't know what permission sets they might need and all that kind of stuff. So we're going to dive into how we work that out. I'm going to show you a couple more here. So I'll be adding 7 new users. So it's another setup. So here's the information for user 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And you'll notice here that they actually give us information for 6 users, but they said 7. So this is where you have to jump in, right? And these are some of the simpler things. And the whole point of this series is to focus on some of the simpler things so that we're not diving into, hey, how do we build a flow around this? There's a lot of content out there about that, but this is really what you're going to see in the real world. So little things like that. So this definitely deserves an email back saying, hey, I see 6 people's information here. Where's number 7? And so let's talk about this. Like we get information, like I mentioned here, and we've got everything we need technically to set up this user, but we don't know which role they need assigned, what profile they need assigned. Do they belong in specific public groups? Do they need queue access? And all those little caveats, right? There's so much that goes into setting up a user. So let's come down here. The tips I would start with are mimicking the user and understanding the user start date. So we'll go through each one of these. But the things you have to start with are typically when you're setting up a new user, 9 times out of 10, there's already someone in the system that needs to operate just like them. So what we're talking about here are, hey, we've got a new sales user who's coming to the team. Okay, you can go back to that manager or whoever's making the request and say, hey, do we already have somebody in the system that they need to have privileges just like that person? And 9 times out of 10, it is, yes, we do. Timothy over here, or Kelly over here is just like this new user, and we need them set up to be just the same. So what you can do is pull up, Kelly's user record, and you can see what role does she have, what profile does she have, what permission sets, what licenses, and that's where we get into this. The roles, profiles, public groups, queues, permission sets. Those are the things you need to look at when you're mimicking a user. So the nice thing is you don't have to think outside of the box really all that well. You just need to be able to look at another user record and sort of copy and paste what you see there. Now, one thing to look out for is the start date. So sometimes people will say, hey, I need a new user setup, and they might start 2 weeks from now. Well, when you create a new user, that temporary password is only good for about 48 hours. So I try to set new users up within a 48-hour window so that the first question you get isn't, hey, I tried to use the password, but it doesn't work. You must have done something wrong. When in reality, the temporary password expired because you set them up far too soon. All right, so that should, in a nutshell, help with new user setup. Now let's jump into user deactivation. So sort of the opposite end of the circle of life for a Salesforce user is they are no longer with the company for whatever reason. So let's take a look at a couple of emails we get on these areas. All right, so username is no longer with the company. So they just drop the username. That's all you need, really. And let's take a look here. So that could come in a wide variety of different ways that could be said, right? Somebody got fired. Please deactivate this person. This person's no longer with the company, whatever it is. And you might get a nice email about it, or you might just hear through the grapevine, or you might hear about it in a meeting, or actually see it take place in a really rough meeting. But what you need to be aware of is, of course, number one is to go into that user record and uncheck the active box. And you're going to take that immediately deactivates them, and it frees up the Salesforce license for their record. So immediately you have another license available. So keep that in mind. Now, the other thing is, in Salesforce, if you're aware, there are owners of records. So leads and accounts and opportunities, these all have owners. And if you deactivate someone, they still remain the owner of that record until you transfer those records to someone else. So sometimes the managers will jump in and reassign records depending on how involved they are. But a lot of times it falls as the responsibility of the Salesforce professional for you to go in and transfer those accounts, transfer those opportunities. And if it's just 1 or 2, you can just go to the record and click the little change owner button and swap it over. But if we're talking about tens or certainly hundreds or thousands of records, then chances are in the setup menu, you might want to head over to the mass transfer records feature in the setup menu. Or if you're experienced using tools like Data Loader, a lot of times you can export records to Data Loader, or you can use tools like list views. You could go to the account list view, create a list of the records there, and you can update ownership there. So there's a lot to be considered. And the biggest things are, of course, deactivate the user and transfer their records. Now, other things to consider for typically administrative users, but sometimes not, are is that username and password being used for any integrations? Is that username and password part of any of the third-party app logins that you have? Are they part of setup items like the default workflow user and things like that? So now Salesforce will error out on you for some of those things, like the setup items. Salesforce will kind of say, hey, we've got an issue here, and it'll error out on you. But for other things like app integrations and things like that, Salesforce is not going to tell you anything, and you're going to be in trouble. So keep that in mind and make sure you know who you're deactivating before you deactivate them. All right, so now let's talk about adding Salesforce licenses. So you might get a request like this. Hey, something like we looked at before, we need to add 5, new users or something like that. And then you go find, hey, we only have 3 licenses available. Like in this particular situation, we're adding 8 new reps, but we only have 3 licenses available. What should we do? And I get a response back that says, let's add 5 more licenses. So how do we do that? So number one, you're going to see this as a recurring topic throughout this series. Be sure to get approval. So whether it's from finance and accounting, whether it's from your manager or their manager, be sure to get approval. And you can check out from within Salesforce. I'm not going to go into exactly where to do that right now. Like I know you can go into the little 9 dots icon and pop that out and go to, I believe it's called checkout from there. I believe in the setup menu, you can go to company information and then look at your licenses, and there's a little checkout item there. But this, of course, could change over time. So just be aware of where those are. But I would bet that in the setup menu under company information, for at least a few years, you're going to be able to find the checkout page from that menu. And you can very quickly, they make it very easy to add licenses. They're not afraid to take your money, and they will allow you to sign on that invoice. So it's up to you to make sure you are approved to sign that invoice and get those licenses, because Salesforce has no issue with you adding licenses. They're keeping the barrier low. So another thing is password resets. So let's look at a few different ways these come in. So password resets on the surface seem really simple. It's just like, oh yeah, just go reset their password. That's such a simple admin task. Well, it's true, but let's make sure we're doing the right things. So here's an email. A certain person told me that you emailed me the credentials for Salesforce, but going through my emails, I don't see your email. Can you resend it? Hey, Brad, this person is getting an error when logging in that says he has been disabled by your admin. Can you please assist? We recently received a request to reset your password for this user. We can't reset your password because your account is temporarily locked due to unsuccessful login attempts. Try again in 30 minutes. Someone emailing saying, hey, I managed to get myself locked out of Salesforce. I had to reboot my computer, and that's when things got weird or went sideways. So here's what I entered. Obviously, your password's not showing in the screenshot, and so let's see what we can do. So there are a few different variations here, right? Like that's not all just as simple as, hey, let's go reset a password, but that's what all of the users think they need. They think they need a quick password reset and everything will be fine. The first thing you should check on any password reset is checking their email address and username. So for instance, if we look back at this, we should check and make sure they're entering the username properly for what was expected. For this one, once again, let's look at that username and talk about why it's being locked out. So you might go look at this user and see what the login attempts are. And Salesforce will tell you, is it a bad password? Was it a bad IP address? Was it outside of the login hours? What happened there? And then here, it's been disabled by your admin. So that means that person is deactivated. Typically with this one, it's just they're using the wrong username and it happens to match up against a username that used to be in the system that's been deactivated. So that might be someone like me, like if there was a Brittany Rice that worked there before me and we might be B Rice at domain, where I think that mine's B Rice at domain, but really it's like B Rice 2 or something like that. So check the login history. This will tell you exactly what's going on. Typically it's IP addresses, login hours. They're logging in from a bad domain. they're using the wrong username, or they really have just put in the wrong password. You need to reset their password and send them an update. So keep all of those things in mind when thinking about resetting passwords and knowing it's not as easy as just clicking the reset password.